This day in history, May 19th. Welcome to History Explained, where we illuminate the past to better understand our present. I'm your guide to your daily journey through the past to empower the future. Today is Monday, May 19th, 2025. As we do every Monday, we're exploring the significant events that happened on this day throughout history. From ancient conflicts to scientific breakthroughs, from cultural milestones to political revolutions, today's date has witnessed numerous pivotal moments that shaped our world. What makes today's journey particularly interesting is how May 19th seems to repeatedly emerge as a day of transformative change across various cultures and eras. Whether through momentous battles, groundbreaking innovations, or the births and deaths of influential figures, the events of May 19th have reverberated throughout time, subtly shaping the world we inhabit today. By examining these historical threads, we can better understand the complex tapestry of human experience. So let's begin our journey back through time and discover what happened on May 19th throughout history, connecting the dots between seemingly disparate events and uncovering the patterns that link our past to our present. Our first stop takes us back to 715 BCE. On this day, according to traditional chronology, Assyrian king Sargon II completed his conquest of Urartu, an ancient kingdom of Armenia. This conquest significantly expanded the Assyrian Empire and reshaped the geopolitics of the ancient Near East. Sargon II, whose name means legitimate king, a name he likely gave himself to legitimize his questionable claim to the throne, was one of the most effective military leaders of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. His campaign against Urartu was part of a broader strategy to secure valuable metal resources and trade routes. The kingdom of Urartu had been a formidable power in the region, controlling territories in what is now Armenia, eastern Turkey, and northwestern Iran. Its sophisticated metallurgy and irrigation systems made it both wealthy and technologically advanced. However, these same resources made it an attractive target for the expanding Assyrian Empire. What's particularly fascinating about this conquest is how it influenced ancient geopolitics. With Urartu subdued, Assyria gained control of crucial trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. This military victory had economic repercussions that would be felt for generations, contributing to Assyria's golden age in the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous artifacts from this period, including the famous Letter to God, in which Sargon recounts his military campaigns. These primary sources offer remarkable insights into how ancient rulers justified their conquests and how they understood their own historical significance. Moving forward several centuries, on May 19, 1218, the Fifth Crusade arrived at its destination in Egypt. Led by King Andrew II of Hungary and Duke Leopold VI of Austria, this military campaign aimed to recapture Jerusalem by first conquering the powerful Ayyubid state in Egypt. The Fifth Crusade represents a fascinating shift in Crusader strategy. Previous attempts to retake Jerusalem had focused on direct assaults through the Levant. However, military planners of the Fifth Crusade recognized that Egypt was the economic and military center of Muslim power in the region. By targeting Egypt first, they hoped to cut off Jerusalem's support and resources. Pope Innocent III had called for this crusade in 1213, but wouldn't live to see it launched. His successor, Pope Honorius III, continued the effort, granting indulgences to those who participated, essentially spiritual rewards that would reduce time in purgatory. This religious motivation combined with political ambition and the promise of wealth and land drove thousands of Europeans to join the campaign. The initial stages went well for the Crusaders. In 1219, they captured the Egyptian port city of Damietta, a major strategic victory. Let's hear a contemporaneous account from Oliver of Paderborn, a German chronicler who participated in the crusade. The Christians entered Damietta, finding it almost empty. For the Lord had struck the Saracens with fear and flight. They discovered much gold and silver, silk garments, cloth of various colors, and household utensils beyond number. Despite this early success, the crusade ultimately ended in failure. The Crusaders rejected favorable peace terms offered by the Sultan al-Kamil that would have returned Jerusalem to Christian control. Instead, they pushed deeper into Egypt, where their forces were trapped by the annual Nile flooding and forced to surrender in 1221. This strategic miscalculation dramatically illustrates how even military campaigns with substantial resources can fail due to poor understanding of local geography and overconfidence. The lessons of the Fifth Crusade would influence future military planners for centuries. On this same day, but in 1296, a very different historical event was unfolding in Scotland. King Edward I of England, known as Longshanks, captured Berwick-upon-Tweed during the First War of Scottish Independence. The subsequent massacre of civilians, with estimates ranging from 7,500 to 20,000 deaths, remains one of the bloodiest episodes in British history. This brutal tactic was meant to terrorize the Scots into submission, demonstrating the often brutal nature of medieval warfare and the civilian costs of political conflicts, themes that unfortunately remain relevant today. As we move into the Renaissance period, May 19, 1536, marks a dark day in English history. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. What makes Anne Boleyn's story so compelling is how it exemplifies the dangerous intersection of personal desire, political ambition, religious reformation, and gender politics. Henry VIII's desperate desire for a male heir led him to break with the Catholic Church when Pope Clement VII refused to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Anne, educated and ambitious, had refused to become merely the king's mistress like her sister Mary before her. Her famous quote captures her strategic thinking: "I will be a queen or nothing." This stance kept Henry in pursuit for nearly 7 years, during which time he revolutionized English religion by establishing the Church of England with himself as its head. After finally marrying in 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, but failed to produce the male heir Henry desperately wanted. By 1536, Henry's eye had wandered to Jane Seymour, and Anne's political enemies seized the opportunity. The charges against Anne were almost certainly fabricated. She was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George, as well as plotting to kill the king. The evidence was flimsy at best, based largely on court gossip and coerced confessions. On the morning of her execution, Anne reportedly made a final speech: "Good Christian people, I have not come here to preach but to die. I am condemned to die by the law. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never." This measured speech suggests extraordinary composure in the face of death, though some historians debate its authenticity. What's undeniable is the profound impact of Anne's brief reign. Her daughter Elizabeth would rule for 44 years in what many consider a golden age of English history. And the religious changes set in motion by Henry's desire for Anne would reshape England's religious and political landscape for centuries. On May 19, 1649, just over a century later, England was declared a Commonwealth after the execution of King Charles I earlier that year. This began a brief but significant period when England was governed as a republic under Oliver Cromwell rather than a monarchy. The English Civil War and the subsequent Commonwealth period represent one of the most radical political experiments in European history. For the first time, a major European power had not merely replaced one monarch with another but had abolished monarchy itself in favor of republican government. Charles I had alienated Parliament through his belief in the divine right of kings, attempts to rule without Parliament, and religious policies. After years of civil war, he was tried for treason against the people of England, a revolutionary concept that challenged the very foundations of monarchical authority. The Commonwealth brought dramatic changes to English society. Cromwell's Puritan values led to the closure of theaters, restrictions on public celebrations, and greater religious austerity. Yet it also saw innovations in governance, with written constitutions like the Instrument of Government of 1653, which some consider England's only written constitution. One particularly interesting aspect of this period was the emergence of radical political groups like the Levellers and the Diggers, who advocated for ideas far ahead of their time, including universal male suffrage, equality before the law, and even early forms of communal property ownership. Though the monarchy would be restored in 1660 with Charles II, the Commonwealth period fundamentally altered the relationship between the Crown and Parliament in England. Never again would an English monarch attempt to rule with the absolute authority claimed by Charles I. This shift toward constitutional monarchy would gradually influence political thought throughout Europe and eventually the world. The 18th century was an age of revolutions, political, industrial, and intellectual. On May 19, 1743, Jean-Pierre Christin, a French physicist, mathematician, and musician, published the design for a mercury thermometer with a centigrade scale. with 0 representing the freezing point of water and 100 its boiling point. While Anders Celsius had proposed a similar scale a year earlier, Kristen's design had the critical difference of placing 0 at the freezing point and 100 at the boiling point, the opposite of Celsius's original arrangement. This more intuitive approach would eventually become the standard worldwide, though it would come to bear Celsius's name rather than Kristen's. This seemingly simple innovation demonstrates how standardized measurement systems underpin scientific progress. Without agreed-upon scales and units, collaborative research across institutions and borders would be nearly impossible. The centigrade scale represented a move toward rationality and standardization characteristic of Enlightenment thinking. Moving to the American colonies, on May 19, 1776, the Continental Congress passed a resolution proposed by John Adams calling on colonies to suppress royal authority and establish independent governments. This came just weeks before the formal Declaration of Independence on July 4. Adams wrote to his wife Abigail that this resolution was the most important resolution that was ever taken in America. In many ways, he was right. This was the moment when the colonies formally committed to independence, not merely resistance to specific British policies. What's particularly interesting is how this resolution reflects the practical, step-by-step process of revolution. Independence wasn't declared in a single dramatic moment but emerged through a series of increasingly bold actions and declarations. This resolution encouraged colonies to develop new governmental structures, constitutions, and political identities independent of Britain. The 19th century brought rapid technological and social change. On May 19, 1828, President John Quincy Adams signed the Tariff of 1828 into law, which became known as the Tariff of Abominations. This controversial legislation imposed high taxes on imported goods to protect northern manufacturing interests but severely damaged the economy of the agricultural South, which relied heavily on exporting cotton and importing manufactured goods. The political maneuvering behind this tariff is fascinating. It was actually designed by opponents of Adams to be so extreme that it would fail, embarrassing his administration. Instead, it unexpectedly passed, creating a political crisis. South Carolina's fierce opposition, led by John C. Calhoun, produced the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, which outlined the theory of nullification, the idea that states could nullify federal laws they deemed unconstitutional. This constitutional crisis foreshadowed the deeper divisions that would lead to the Civil War. The competing economic interests of industrial North and agricultural South, questions about federal versus state power, and the unresolved issue of slavery were creating fault lines in American society that would eventually rupture. On May 19, 1848, Mexico ratified the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, officially ending the Mexican-American War. This treaty ceded vast territories to the United States, including California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. This massive land acquisition, often celebrated in American history as fulfilling the nation's manifest destiny, came at an enormous cost to Mexico, which lost approximately 55% of its territory. The treaty provided only $15 million in compensation, a fraction of the land's value. For the 75,000 to 100,000 Mexican citizens suddenly living in U.S. territory, the treaty guaranteed citizenship and property rights. However, subsequent legal challenges, discrimination, and outright land theft meant that many Mexican landowners lost their property despite these promises. The acquisition of these territories dramatically altered American development. The discovery of gold in California just days before the treaty was signed sparked the gold rush of 1849. The new territories would eventually become centers of agriculture, mining, and later technology. For Mexico, this devastating territorial loss remains a pivotal moment in national identity and continues to influence U.S.-Mexican relations today. On May 19, 1864, in the midst of the American Civil War, the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse ended after nearly 2 weeks of brutal fighting between Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant and Confederate forces under General Robert E. Lee. This extended engagement demonstrated the changing nature of warfare. Both armies constructed extensive trench systems, foreshadowing the trench warfare that would characterize World War I. At the bloody angle, soldiers fought for 20 hours in what some historians consider the most intense sustained combat of the war. One Union soldier described the conditions. The mud was half-leg deep, and the dead and wounded were actually trampled into the mud by the feet of the contending forces. The battle raged with unabated fury, Fresh troops were constantly pushed forward to take the place of those who had fallen. The battle resulted in approximately 32,000 casualties combined, yet ended in a strategic stalemate. Grant, unlike previous Union generals, refused to retreat after the bloody engagement, instead continuing his relentless pressure on Lee's forces. This persistence would eventually lead to Union victory, though at a tremendous human cost. The 20th century saw even more accelerated change and global conflict. On May 19, 1906, the Federated Boys Clubs, the organization that would later become Boys and Girls Clubs of America, was founded. This organization emerged during the Progressive Era, when reformers were increasingly concerned about the welfare of children amid rapid urbanization and industrialization. Many children in crowded cities had few safe places for recreation and development. The boys' clubs aimed to provide a positive alternative to the streets, offering organized activities, educational programs, and adult mentorship. What's notable about this development is how it reflected changing conceptions of childhood in American society. Increasingly, childhood was seen as a distinct developmental phase requiring protection and nurturing, rather than merely preparation for adult labor. This shift in thinking about children's needs would eventually lead to child labor laws, compulsory education, and a host of other protective measures. On May 19, 1919, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk landed at Samsun on the Black Sea coast, beginning the Turkish War of Independence. This date is considered so significant in Turkish history that it's now celebrated as commemoration of Ataturk, Youth and Sports Day. The Ottoman Empire, which had ruled much of the Middle East, North Africa, and southeastern Europe for centuries, had allied with Germany during World War I. Following their defeat, the Allied powers occupied Constantinople and planned to divide Ottoman territories among themselves. Ataturk, a respected military officer, traveled to Anatolia to organize Turkish resistance against this partition. His landing at Samsun marks the beginning of what Turks call their War of National Liberation. Over the next 4 years, Turkish forces would successfully resist Greek, Armenian, French, and British attempts to claim Ottoman territories. What makes Ataturk particularly fascinating as a historical figure is how he combined military leadership with radical social reform. After establishing the Republic of Turkey in 1923, he implemented sweeping changes to modernize and secularize the country, replacing Arabic script with a Latin-based alphabet, granting women equal rights, separating religion from government, and promoting Western-style education, dress, and culture. Ataturk's transformation of Turkey represents one of the most comprehensive and rapid modernization programs in history. His legacy remains central to Turkish identity today, though his secularist vision has been challenged in recent decades by the rise of political Islam. On May 19, 1935, T. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, succumbed to injuries from a motorcycle accident in Dorset, England. Lawrence was an extraordinary figure whose actual accomplishments have sometimes been obscured by his own myth-making and later romanticized portrayals. As a British Army officer during World War I, he served as a liaison to Arab forces rebelling against Ottoman rule. He became famous for his unconventional guerrilla tactics, cultural adaptability, and personal charisma. His book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, chronicled his wartime experiences and became a classic of military literature. However, historians continue to debate how much Lawrence embellished his role in events. What's undeniable is his influence on military theory, particularly regarding unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency. Lawrence's legacy becomes even more complex when we consider the aftermath of the Arab Revolt. Despite his promises to Arab leaders about independence, the Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France had already secretly divided much of the Middle East into European spheres of influence. This betrayal of Arab aspirations for self-determination created boundaries and tensions that continue to shape the region today. Lawrence himself became deeply disillusioned by this outcome. After the war, despite his fame, he sought anonymity by enlisting in the Royal Air Force under assumed names. His complicated relationship with fame, his alleged psychological trauma from the war, and his mysterious private life have made him an enduring object of fascination. The mid-20th century was shaped by World War II and the subsequent Cold War. On May 19, 1943, Winston Churchill addressed a joint session of the United States Congress, discussing Allied war strategy against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. This was Churchill's second address to Congress, coming at a crucial moment in World War II. The tide was beginning to turn in favor of the Allies, with victories in North Africa and the Soviet Union's successful defense of Stalingrad. Yet enormous challenges remained, including the planned invasion of Sicily and eventually mainland Europe. Churchill's speech skillfully balanced confidence with caution, emphasizing the special relationship between Britain and America while acknowledging the sacrifices still to come. His rhetoric reflected his belief in the democratic West as a bulwark against totalitarianism, a theme that would continue into the Cold War era. On May 19, 1958, the United States and Canada formed the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, a joint military organization designed to detect and respond to potential aerial attacks, particularly from Soviet bombers carrying nuclear weapons. NORAD represented a new phase in military cooperation between the United States and Canada, driven by the existential threat of nuclear war. Its establishment reflected the reality that geographic isolation no longer provided security in the atomic age. Intercontinental ballistic missiles and long-range bombers had made North America vulnerable in unprecedented ways. The technology behind NORAD was cutting-edge for its time, involving a network of radar stations, fighter interceptors, and eventually satellites and computers. The famous Cheyenne Mountain Complex, built into the granite of a Colorado mountain to withstand nuclear attack, became an iconic Cold War facility. What's particularly interesting about NORAD is how it embodied the paradox of nuclear deterrence, preparing for a war that must never be fought. The organization's mission was essentially to ensure that mutual assured destruction remained a theoretical concept rather than a reality. For decades, military personnel monitored screens around the clock, watching for signs of an attack that never came. In 1962, on May 19, at Madison Square Garden in New York City, Marilyn Monroe delivered her famous "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" performance to President John F. Kennedy. This brief performance, just 30 seconds of Monroe singing in a breathy voice while wearing a skin-tight, rhinestone-studded dress, became one of the most iconic moments in American popular culture. It occurred at a Democratic fundraiser just 10 days before Kennedy's actual 45th birthday. The performance fueled rumors of an affair between Monroe and Kennedy, which many historians now believe did occur, though the extent and duration remain disputed. Beyond the gossip, this moment captured a unique convergence of politics, celebrity, and sexuality in American culture during the Cold War era. Monroe's dress, designed by Jean Louis and based on a sketch by Bob Mackie, was so tight that she had to be sewn into it. In 2016, it sold at auction for $4.8 million, making it one of the most expensive pieces of memorabilia ever sold. This extraordinary value reflects how objects associated with iconic cultural moments can acquire almost religious significance in our celebrity-focused culture. The performance came at a difficult time in Monroe's life. She had been fired from her final, unfinished film, Something's Got to Give, due to chronic lateness and absences. Just months later, on August 5, 1962, she would be found dead from an overdose of barbiturates, ruled a probable suicide. Her death at 36 transformed her from a celebrity into a tragic legend whose image continues to generate hundreds of millions of dollars decades later. Moving into more recent history, on May 19, 1994, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, former First Lady and widow of President John F. Kennedy, died in New York City at age 64. Jackie Kennedy, as she is still often called despite her second marriage to Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis, remains one of the most iconic First Ladies in American history. Her impact on American culture extended far beyond her 2.5 years in the White House, influencing fashion, historic preservation, the arts, and public perceptions of the Kennedy legacy. After surviving the trauma of her husband's assassination, during which she showed extraordinary composure, Jackie dedicated herself to preserving JFK's memory and legacy. She carefully crafted the Camelot narrative of the Kennedy administration, comparing it to the mythical court of King Arthur in an influential Life magazine interview given just weeks after the assassination. What's less well known about Jackie is her significant career as a book editor after her time as First Lady. Working first at Viking Press and later at Doubleday, she edited books by Michael Jackson, Diana Vreeland, and many others. This professional achievement is often overshadowed by her iconic status as a style icon and presidential widow. Her commitment to historic preservation saved numerous significant buildings, most notably Grand Central Terminal in New York City. When the station was threatened with demolition in the 1970s, Jackie led a successful campaign to preserve it, taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Her funeral at St. Ignatius Loyola Church in Manhattan drew luminaries from politics, fashion, and the arts. She was buried beside President Kennedy at Arlington National Cemetery, with a small private ceremony attended only by close family members, reflecting the private nature she maintained despite intense public fascination with her life. On May 19, 2000, the Chinese government gave the U.S. Congress its final approval to grant China permanent normal trade relations, a significant step toward China's accession to the World Trade Organization the following year. This decision profoundly reshaped the global economy, accelerating China's emergence as a manufacturing powerhouse and transforming supply chains worldwide. The belief among many Western policymakers was that economic liberalization would gradually lead to political liberalization in China, a theory that remains highly contested. The impacts were dramatic. Between 2000 and 2020, U.S. trade with China increased from roughly $100 billion to over $600 billion annually. Millions of manufacturing jobs moved from the United States and other developed nations to China, while consumers benefited from lower prices for a vast array of goods. The long-term geopolitical implications of this economic integration continue to unfold. While it has created deep economic interdependence between the United States and China, it has not prevented growing strategic competition and tensions. This economic relationship has become one of the central questions of 21st-century international relations. On May 19, 2018, Prince Harry married Meghan Markle at Windsor Castle, in what was widely viewed as a modernizing moment for the British monarchy. Their wedding, watched by an estimated 1.9 billion people worldwide, incorporated elements that distinguished it from previous royal ceremonies. The service included a gospel choir, an African-American bishop delivering a passionate sermon, and various elements reflecting Meghan's biracial heritage and American nationality. Initially celebrated as representing a more inclusive and modern monarchy, the couple's subsequent decision to step back from royal duties in 2020 sparked intense debate about racism in British society, media treatment of the couple, and the challenges of modernizing ancient institutions. In their controversial 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, they alleged that concerns had been expressed within the royal family about their future children's skin color and that Meghan had been denied support while experiencing suicidal thoughts. These allegations highlighted ongoing tensions around race, mental health, and tradition. Their story reflects broader societal debates about the role of monarchy in the 21st century, institutional racism, mental health, and the toxic aspects of traditional and social media. As of 2025, they continue to navigate their unique position as members of the royal family who have chosen a different path, residing primarily in California while pursuing various media and philanthropic ventures. As we've seen today, May 19 has witnessed conquests and coronations, executions and weddings, diplomatic treaties and cultural milestones. From the ancient Assyrian Empire to the modern British monarchy, from the Mexican-American War to the Turkish War of Independence, the events of this date have left their mark on our collective history. What stands out as we review these diverse events is how they connect across time and geography. The religious conflicts of the Crusades find echoes in modern geopolitical tensions. The constitutional questions raised during the English Commonwealth period continue to shape debates about governance today. And the economic policies enacted on this date, from the Tariff of Abominations to China's trade status, reveal how commercial interests have always been intertwined with political power. By studying these historical threads, we gain perspective on our current challenges. The past doesn't simply repeat itself, as the old saying suggests, but it does provide patterns and precedents that can inform our understanding of present dilemmas. The philosopher George Santayana famously noted, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Perhaps more optimistically, we might say that those who do study the past are equipped with a broader range of possibilities and perspectives as they face the future. History isn't just about memorizing dates and names, it's about understanding human experience across time. It reveals our capacity for both tremendous cruelty and remarkable compassion, for destructive conflict and inspiring cooperation. By examining these patterns, we gain insight not just into what happened before, but into what might be possible going forward. Thank you for joining us for this day in history. Tomorrow, we'll be back with our Historical Figures episode where we'll be exploring the life and legacy of Florence Nightingale, whose 205th birthday was celebrated last week. If you enjoyed this journey through time, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Which of today's historical events surprised or intrigued you the most? Let us know in the comments section below. For our members, this Sunday we'll have a special roundup of historical anniversaries from the past week with additional insights and analysis. We'll dive deeper into how these events interconnect and explore some fascinating primary sources that reveal the human side of these historical moments. Until next time, I'm your guide for History Explained, where we believe that understanding yesterday is the key to navigating tomorrow.